Everyone, I would like to invite you to the Table of Grace.
At the table of grace, the cup's never empty, the plate's always full, and it's never too late to come and be filled with love never ending. You're always welcome to the table of grace.
Hi everyone, welcome to Table of Grace. I'm Melissa Hilton. This week's guest, we have Father Ronny O'Dwyer and Mr. Jonathan with us. So stay tuned, and after the break, we'll be right back.
At the table of grace, the cup's never empty, the plate's always full, and it's never too late.
The Table of Grace.
At the table of grace, the cup's never empty, the plate's always full, and it's never too late.
Welcome back to Table of Grace. I'm Melissa Hilton. Let's get the show started.
Let's do it.
Let's do this. So let's introduce Father Ronny and Jonathan. Mr. Jonathan, Seminarian Jonathan, Jesuit Jonathan.
Mr. Jonathan. Father Ronny and Mr. Jonathan.
Mr. Jonathan. I see this episode of the show being so much fun. I can just look into your eyes, and I know this will be so excited.
I'm ready to go. This is my first TV debut.
We have a lot of people that would be so interested in this. What's the difference? You're a Jesuit priest. What's the difference between a Jesuit priest and a diocesan priest?
Let's hear for it.
So, Jesuits are a religious order within the church. So what you have is over the course of history, since the time of Jesus, we would say was in some sense the first priest of the Christian tradition. And then he also made his followers priests. And what happened was these little groups of people would gather on Sundays to tell stories and to break bread and offer wine to remember their friend Jesus. And over time, those people that the community chose to break the bread and offer the wine and preach and remember Jesus were called priests. And that ceremony and that distinction and title as time has gone on, has gotten more and more firm and clear and delineated. And so a diocesan priest serves a specific diocese.
Okay.
For example, the Diocese of Belize. And they work under a bishop, and they live their entire life in that area. But what happened in the history of the church was over time, different needs arose where a very specific type of person and called to a very specific expression of the priesthood was called for. And so you had originally people that lived in the desert, like Anthony of the Desert was very early in the tradition. And from there grew monks, and monks would live set apart. And then from there would grow in the Middle Ages, Franciscans and Dominicans, who we called the mendicants, who would walk around and beg. They were itinerant, which is a word for moving around, preachers. And then from there, in the 1500s, our religious order grew up, which was a real need for missionary activity, to go out into the ends of the world and preach the gospel and tell people about the love of God for them. And so our specific group, the Jesuits, grew from a founder called St. Ignatius Loyola. I don't know if you want to say anything about St. Ignatius or...
I can. Sure. St. Ignatius, from his early life, was training to be a knight. He was a nobleman. And early in his life, he was in the Battle of Pamplona and was injured. He was hit by a cannonball. And he was so sort of fervent in his willingness to continue even after his great injury, his enemies took him in. They respected him so much that they took him in and allowed him to return to his castle in Loyola and recover. And while he was recovering, he kept requesting these sort of romantic novels of knights and chivalry and the like. And all that they had were the lives of the saints and the life of Christ. And so he put off and put off and put off. He said, "This is going to be boring. I don't want to read that." But eventually he, after having nothing else to do, read these. And the lives of the saints especially moved him, hearing the lives of St. Francis or St. Dominic, these great men who went out and changed lives, moved hearts. And he felt this great desire move within him to do the same thing. And this was sort of the beginning of the Ignatian spirituality, right? Because he would have these two desires, this desire to be a great knight, to serve the queen and to do all of these great things, these brave and heroic acts. And he would also have this desire to serve God in a very specific way, in the example of the great religious leaders of the time. And so he was sort of deciding between these two very good things.
Okay.
It's not necessarily between a good and a bad, but how do you choose between these two goods, right? And so that's sort of the beginning of his sort of conversion to that life. He hung up his sword at an altar to Our Lady, and went on a quest to become sort of very knightly, right? Very heroic. He went on a quest to become exactly the opposite of that, right? To be very poor.
And Melissa, these things take on a life of their own. So that was 500 years ago. And this little band, then he gets together with his friends and they start a little band of brothers that then went out and lived together and preached and taught and served in hospitals. And over time, over the past 500 years, this little group grew to a very large group. And right now, the Jesuits are the largest order of priests, religious order of priests and brothers in the world. And we work all over the world in big cities and in small towns and in villages and in metropolitan areas, doing whatever we can do to preach the joy and the love of the gospel and of Jesus, and to try to help people have a real intimate friendship with Jesus, that he's a person.
Do you choose which one you want to be, if you want to be a Jesuit or a diocesan?
Sure, certainly. So well, I don't know if you choose, but more it's God chooses for you or invites you. It's a sense of discernment where throughout one's life you discern, like, Lord, where are you calling me to serve you, and in what way, and how specifically do you want me to offer my life for the world?
Okay, I know with diocesan priests there's certain things that they can and they can't do. With you guys, are you allowed?
It's even stricter.
That's right. It's even worse, or
Really?
better, some would say.
It's not so what we'll talk about here is there's two ways to think about it. There's a way to think about it as you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't have these things, or you look at what you're saying yes to. And of all of our lives, I think, to make any yes choices, whether it's the yes to be a parent, or the yes to fall in love, or the yes to go do a college degree or some kind of great work in the world, you're saying no. That means you're going to say no to a lot of other possibilities. And that's difficult for us to wrap our heads around. So it's not so much a loss of, oh no, you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't do this. It's a yes to saying what I can do is how can I best offer myself most completely, most freely to those around me. And so that's where I think the year of consecrated life comes in, which you want to talk about, and the religious vows that not just Jesuits take, but any religious person that is a priest in a religious order or a nun or a religious brother. We all take the same three promises: to be poor, to be chaste, and to be obedient.
Yeah.
And you guys are teachers. You teach. Do you give masses or no?
I don't at this point. I'm still in training. I'm a seminarian to become a priest. So in about 4 years, God willing, I will be in Father Ronny's shoes.
But we do whatever we can do to help to be of service to people. So in some places, if that's teaching, certainly we'll teach. And in many places, it has been that. In other places, it is just the ministry of listening, of having a place to go that's quiet, to help people listen to God and to listen to them, to help them to see how God is working in their life. In other places, it's much more active, like soup kitchens or a homeless shelter or something like that. We will do whatever is needed in the specific area that we feel called.
Okay. And you have 4 more years, you said, to go back to.
Yeah.
So when you go back, you're going into studying or back to teaching and see what you're doing?
So I've got 1 more year of teaching. I teach theology mostly. And then after next year, I'll return to my theology studies for about 3 more years to prepare for priestly ordination.
Okay. And you're back to studying, or you're?
Oh, well, I'm a priest, so I'll be saying, I say many
back.
masses and hear confessions and anoint the sick and baptize babies and do funerals and go to the cemetery and just sit and listen and pray, ministry of prayer for the world and for the church and all that is a priest.
That's a good thing. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask, don't worry, ladies, I'm going to ask the questions that you all were dying to know. So when we come back with Table of Grace, we're going to find a lot more about Father Ronny and Mr. Jonathon. Stay tuned.
At the table of grace, the cup's never empty, the plate's always full, and it's never too late.
The Table of Grace.
At the table of grace, the cup's never empty, the plate's always full, and it's never too late.
Welcome back to Table of Grace with Melissa. We have Father Ronny and Mr. Jonathon. When we left, we were talking about a Jesuit's life and everything. I know there are going to be a lot of women watching this TV right now, this show, and they'll be like, I don't see how they say they're priests or they're Jesuits. What made you guys decided to become a Jesuit? Well, to study.
I can start, sure. Before I became a Jesuit, I was going to school to become an artist, a digital artist. And so really, the idea of the priesthood was pretty far from my mind. That was something that wasn't really even on the radar. But what I found out was the more and more I studied art, sort of encountering the beauty in the world, the more my heart was sort of turned to the Lord. And I started going to Mass more often. And it was kind of funny when I first started hearing the voice of, maybe this is something that I need to look at. I said, no, that's dumb. I'm not the kind of person that becomes a priest. So I put it away, right? I put it aside. But that voice kept coming back. And eventually I got to the point where I couldn't really ignore it anymore. And I said, I had to say, okay, I'll give it a shot at least. And for me, that was one of the graces of my Jesuit formation so far, is that we have that built in. The very first 2 years of our formation is sort of that testing time to see if this is really what God is asking. So at any point you can say, thanks but no thanks, effectively, and that's that. But I persevered, and I'm still here, and I love it. It's all that I could have hoped for. It's one of the things that I love most about being a Jesuit is community. I get guys like Father Ronny that I get to live with and to work with and to pray with, and to preach with, and to evangelize with, and it's phenomenal. It's wonderful.
You know, Melissa, people ask all the time, when did you decide you wanted to be a priest? And I said, this morning when I woke up. Because like anything in our lives, a vocation or a marriage or being a teacher is something we have to commit to every day. And in some sense, every day it's fresh and you start anew. But it's a journey and it's a story. And so my story begins on November 28th, 1982 in New Orleans, Louisiana, where I was baptized as a little baby. And at that time, you know, as in the way we understand the world, I was configured to be and have the heart and the mind and the life of Jesus, who was a prophet, who was a priest, and who was a king. And in particular, there's some of us that are called to have a particular expression of that priesthood of Jesus. Just like I think there's people called in the world to have a particular expression of being a prophet, there are people, don't you, that in our lives or we see in history are just prophetic. They just are able to speak the truth when it's time to hear it. So the priesthood is no different. And for those of us that are called to that, it's a great gift and a mystery. So in the way God works in our hearts is he just, in my experience, made me attracted to doing priestly things, to saying Mass, to teaching, to being with people that are forgotten or that don't have a voice. And he gave me great mentors along the way, guys that really took an interest in me and were gentle and also quite funny. I remember I was down here in Belize about 15 years ago on a service trip. We worked at the little home for the indigent and cared for them and cleaned and did all kind of things and played a lot of checkers and bingo, and it was a blast. And I was very anxious about having to figure out if I was supposed to be a priest, So I went to the priest, the elderly priest who was there, and I said, Father, I think I'm supposed to be a priest, and I think we need to figure this out right now because it's time to get started. And he just said, Ronny, relax. If you have a vocation to the priesthood, you will have it in the morning. And it was just that just helped me just to be so calm and just to say, okay, this is going to be wonderful, and we'll learn to really trust in the slow work of God that is really, I think, the heart of being a Christian, is learning to trust in that.
It's funny because, well, as a female, I think it has a lot to do with a lot of different people. When you hear, Jesuits and priests, it's always someone that's proper and put together, and not to say you're not. It's just this vision that you have in mind, and then when you meet someone as fun and outgoing, and you're like, are you sure that's what you want to do? That was like my first thought. I was like, wait, hold on. You always take that second look on someone. Throughout your studying and your time, has there been any significant experience that you guys, particular experience that you hold deeply to you?
In answer to your first question, or your first point about people that aren't put together and aren't this, it's true. And God doesn't call the perfect, but he gives us the grace to offer ourselves in our own ways. And I think about the apostles for certainly, St. Peter and Judas and Matthew, the tax collector, and all the regular people that Jesus chose to be his friends and his companions and his disciples. And the truth is, and the great joy is, they're not much different than us. And regular people, as I always say, who put on their shirt one leg at a time.
What has there any, like I had asked earlier, is there any one thing that you guys enjoyed throughout all this process? One thing that you enjoyed and one thing that you missed from prior to becoming a Jesuit?
I'll say one thing that I really have enjoyed is the opportunity to visit so many places and so many people, and to just to share, to talk, to encounter Christ in other people, whether it be here in Belize or in Bolivia or Nicaragua, or just back in my home in Dallas. I just love getting that opportunity to share with people.
As a significant experience for me has been that I've learned to be more aware of God's working in very ordinary things. And we always expect the extraordinary moments to find God. Mm-hmm. But rather, I think God is showing himself present to us in the everyday stuff. So the great joy that I've had in this life is being close to people in their everyday life. So when their parent gets sick or their grandparent dies, every day, those aren't extraordinary moments. They're things that happen in everyone's life. Or when teaching, when kids forget their lunch or don't do well on the test. It's a question of how do you rebuild the pieces? How do you put it back together? When the extraordinary moments that are kind of ordinary to the world, but extraordinary in one's life, like a high school kid that falls in love. and they're confused and don't know where to turn and what do we do? And that's where God's always present.
Yeah.
Because every experience of love, I think, is an experience of God. It's God showing himself to us. So sharing a meal is not just sharing a meal. It's special, it's holy, and it's charged with God's presence. And so people have taught me that along the way, and that's where I experience God.
I'm going to ask you this question because of some reason I feel like you're dodging. Both of you are dodging this question here. Have you guys ever gotten your heart broken? Because for some reason, this is just my opinion. I believe you were heartbroken, and that was where your heart got opened to hear God's voice. See, Jonathan's smiling, so I believe
I'll say something. Yeah. Sure. I think that's a part of most guys' lives. But I will say that I came to this realization that if I look back at especially the priest role models that I've had throughout my life, and I look at what I admire about them, it was usually their loving kindness, right? Their ability to care for their people. And if I think about it, those are pretty much the exact same qualities of a good father, right? And so I do see the exact same qualities are needed to be a good priest that are needed to be a good father. So when I spoke earlier about trying to decide between two good things, that's precisely where I was before I entered, right? It wasn't, I didn't default to religious to priest because that's all I could, that's all that was left for me. It was a choice, right? And it's a struggle, right? The vow of chastity is a struggle, and it should be, right? It helps us to realize precisely what we've given up. But like Father Ronny said, it also reminds us of precisely what we're gaining. We don't give ourselves just to a particular person, we give ourselves to everybody. And not in the particular ways, obviously, but in a broader, more sort of just in a different way. And I think having had experiences of love are good, so that you can. Let me say this. Having the experiences of love are needed because of that, right? Because that's how you become a loving person, by loving, right? Yeah. And so shutting myself off to loving isn't what God is calling me to do, right? He's not calling me to a particular love, but he's calling me to love because God is love. And so I need to have that experience of love to minister effectively.
Father Ronny, before you say anything, what I would like to say is, with that, I see I don't want to just say young men, but young people on a whole, will somewhat feel a bit more comfortable talking, not only because of what you just said, but simply because speaking from a young person perspective, it is hard for me to go and talk to a priest, in the sense that for me to do that, I need to prepare myself mentally and everything before I make that step. On the other hand, if there was somebody young, someone that I feel I can more relate, so it would make it a bit easier to go and talk to them. And that is what is a lot of our problems right now. We don't want to go and talk because we feel as if we will be judged. So by people knowing you're young, you're a human being as well, you've been there, and you can give them a greater insight of what they probably want to hear or need to hear, that is something that they will keep with them. And I like the idea of you as a person simply because you're a package. And when I say you're a package, it's because I can relate to you. Like, in my eyes, you're not even a Jesuit. And that is what people need to look at. You're a human being. I don't want to look at someone and say, oh, he's a priest, so I'm going to stay away from him. He don't know what this is or what that, and that is different. That is the vibe that I am getting. It's completely, you're just a person put there that, yes, I can go to you, I can talk to you, you can teach me, and you can advise what I should and what I shouldn't do, or not even the sense of shouldn't do, but which way I should direct, which path is more walkable for me. And that is something that I think a lot of us need. And the young men today their hearts aren't open. And I don't know what it will take to get them to open their hearts. And this is something that honestly I am really excited about, simply because I'm sitting beside two fine gentlemen who are Jesuit priests, who's young, and who actually took the time to open their hearts to hear what God is saying. I mean, no disrespect when I said fine, but...
Well, we are the collection of the people that have loved us.
Yeah, totally.
We all are.
Exactly.
And that's all. And so once you know you're loved, you can offer it to the world. But I think the challenge in our culture, and the challenge not just with young men or not young women, is, Jonathon alluded to it, once you've been burned once in love, whether that's family love, whether that's relationship love, whether that's friendship love, whatever kind of love, level of love or type of love that it is. It only takes once to be burned, and it's very difficult to go back. And it's very difficult to go back. And so I think that what the challenge of the gospel really invites us to, when we talk about loving our enemy and turning the other cheek, and is having the courage to be loved again. And having the courage to listen to the loving voice of Jesus saying, in the midst of suffering and in the midst of hardship and on your worst days, I love you. And that's really difficult to believe and to listen to. Mm-hmm. But I think it's one of the big challenges of our day. And I think that if I was to talk about what I would hope the mission of my priesthood is, it's to help us to live with an eye towards gratitude and towards seeing God at work in the world, not in the periphery, not far away, not only in church, but like alive right here and right now. And when we talk and in our conversations, and offering his healing and his love and his joy, the joy of the gospel.
Yeah.
I think that's what our world needs.
And prayer.
And prayer.
And prayer. But that's a prayer. That's a prayer. Learning to see God is prayer.
We'll be right back with more Table of Grace shortly. Stay tuned.
At the table of grace, the cup's never empty. The plate's always full, and it's never too late.
The Table of Grace.
At the table of grace, the cup's never empty. The plate's always full, and it's never too late.
Welcome back to Table of Grace. I'm Melissa. We have Father Father Ronny, and Mr. Jonathon with us. If you missed the first two episodes, you missed a lot. Trust me, you did. Either one of you, what would you say to someone considering to enter into consecrated life?
Well, the first advice I would give is pray. Don't stop or start praying. And find somebody that you can talk to. That's really crucial, to have somebody that you can trust, whether it be a priest or a sister or a brother, or even your parents, if you feel comfortable speaking with your parents. Talking about it helps considerably, because then you can sort of see, okay, is this sort of, am I idealizing something? And we see that with married life as well. You can have an idealized version of that. So with anything, not just consecrated life, talk about it, right? And it's a lifelong decision, just like marriage. So you don't want to enter into it hastily, just like you wouldn't enter into a marriage hastily.
How long did it take you to realize, I know we've talked about it, but how long did it take you to realize this is what I want to do? Like in terms of a year, 2 years?
Well, I was later to the game than Father Ronny. I didn't start actually thinking about it until I was about 18.
Okay.
Going off to college. And I entered when I was 23 in 2008. So it took a few years for me to get to the point where I was ready to enter. Right? It takes a long time to sort of choose. At the beginning, I had to choose whether or not I wanted to be a diocesan priest or a Jesuit. So it takes time. And that's something that I would say, just be patient.
Did you have your family's support on it?
I did. I was very lucky. Yeah, both of my parents were very supportive. My siblings were okay with it. They didn't really have too much to say. They still don't.
Are you your mother's youngest, the baby, or?
I'm the third of 6 kids. Yeah, so I have an older brother and older sister, and then some younger ones.
And you?
I guess I would tell a young person to learn to see their life as an unfolding story,
Okay.
and to start to plot it that way, and to see where the working of God has been throughout it, and what do you think is going to make you happy. Jonathan talked about St. Ignatius when he got sick, when he got hit with the cannonball and he was laying there and all he had was the books about chivalry and the Bible. And I would really say that was a time of really listening to what God has in store for us. And how do we listen? I think we think over our lives to the times when we felt really happy. We think over our lives to the time when we felt really fulfilled. We think over our life for the times that we felt like we were going outside of ourselves, that we were joyful, that we were connected with others. And if those are times associated with God, or with helping others, or with doing the kind of things that priests and nuns do, and that's attractive and you want that and you desire it, I think that's a pretty good sign that this might be for you, or it might be time for you to talk to someone that you trust and that you love. I think that's great advice to talk. But that our lives have a purpose, and that God has a purpose for each of us. And that purpose is one that we know when we feel free and we feel liberated and when we feel like we're giving of ourselves. Not that we're nervous and we have to do it and we have no other choice and, oh my God, God is forcing me into this. No, I think that God works to us like water falls onto a sponge, that it's gentle and it's kind and it's attractive, and it makes us want to be more whole.
And you also had the support of your family?
I did have the support of my family, yes, and that's a great gift. Because when you know you're loved, you can do anything.
Yeah.
And that's in all of our lives. When people love you and you know that and they let you know that, there's nothing that you can't do.
Sky's the limit then.
More than the sky. Eternity.
Usually people tend to look at like with me, I don't focus, I'm a Catholic. And I'm proud of being a Catholic. However, I don't look at it as only Catholics can be, only religious people can be. You know, it takes anybody to have the need to take the time to just sit by yourself a little bit and then have your mind and everything else opened up to hear anything that might come their way. It's just amazing, and I might stutter a lot here and I might be all lost for words, but I just want to say that this is so amazing to have young men actually leading a God-filled life, because you don't get to see that very often. Most men will be like, oh, I want a family. And of course, like you had said earlier, parents want grandchildren running around the house and everything. But it really took a lot out of you to say, you know, this is what I want. And you went for it. No distractions along the way. Well, there probably were, but you were strong enough to overcome those distractions.
With God's help.
With God's help,
That's right. We don't do it by ourselves.
Not at all. And Melissa, what I would tell you is if you found this attractive and you found this fun, we do it every Sunday. So come on down. And it's free. and what we offer is I think people ask, why do you go to Mass? What's the point of going to Mass? I don't get anything out of it. It's boring. People are old. It's the same routine. And But the realities of our life is that we need each other, and life is too difficult to go it alone, and that's why we have to come together.
Yeah.
To be fed by those stories that give us life, to receive the Lord who loves us, and to meet one another and be supported by the fact that people are going through difficult things, and it's not just me, and we're in this together. And young people have something to give to this. We need you there because you offer something that no one else can offer. Vigor and youth and idealism and passion that gets cooled over age when you get your heart broken, and young people will fire up in us a way of living passionately, and I think that's what we need more than anything.
What are you guys? I know you're only here for the summer, and you're at St. Martin de Porres Parish. What are you guys doing for the summer? You saying masses? You're working with youth?
I'm doing a lot with the youth, coordinating retreats and working with some of the summer school opportunities at the school, mostly.
Okay.
And I'm saying Mass every morning at 6:30 and on Sundays, and visiting the sick and hearing confessions and doing the stuff that we do and trying to help people to connect the great loves in their life with the great love that God has for them. And that changes the world.
Yeah, even if it does one person at a time.
Certainly.
It does. It surely does. Have you guys come back to Belize?
I think so.
This is my second time here.
Do you
Mine too.
love it?
It's wonderful.
love it?
It's
I
wonderful.
love Belize, and I love the people, and I love the food.
When you're finished with all your studying and everything, do you get to choose where you want to go, or at least do you have a say in where you want to go?
You certainly have a say. I mean, our superiors aren't really keen on sending guys somewhere where they're going to be absolutely miserable, right? They want to avoid that as much as possible. So it's through a lot of prayer and through a lot of discussion that, we have the vow of obedience. So ultimately our superiors say where we go, but that's not to say that decision's made in a vacuum. It's through a lot of prayer and a lot of conversation.
We're on a team, and like any team, sometimes you got to play positions you're not really wild about.
Sure.
But the team wins if everyone plays together and everyone works with what they have, and that's how I choose to see holy obedience, as we call it.
Wow. Is there anything out there that you guys would like to say before we leave?
Our faith is our greatest gift, and to nourish it is not just something we do when we sit back, but it's an activity. It's something if our faith grows by doing the activities of faith, which really are being a loving person, not in the extraordinary things, but every day, at home, in the office, at school, at work, trying to be loving, trying to be more Christ-like. And that's how our faith grows, and that's how our sensitivity to God grows.
I would say that if we look at the whole point of our faith, right, it's to be transformed into someone greater, to something greater. And how do we do that? It's through that encounter with Christ. And what is that encounter? Well, it's through each other. It's through opening up ourselves. Who did Christ encounter in the Gospels? It was the poor, it was the sick, it was the broken, the sinners, right? That's us. And what did he say every single time? Go, your faith has saved you. Be better, be more, love. Don't just love those who already love you back. That's easy. Sinners do that. Take the next step. Love those who hate you.
And that is the hardest thing.
That's exactly the hardest thing, right? And that's that newness that Christ is calling us to. And so just to be open to that, it's not going to be easy. I would say that it's going to certainly be hard. There are going to be those hard choices, those hard decisions. But What is Christ calling us to? He's calling us to that greater sense of who we truly are. And we're loving beings, we're loving creatures. So.
You said one thing there that I would really like you to shine a little bit of advice on. Loving the ones that don't love you, or the ones that hate you. That is something very, very hard to do, and a lot of us don't have that ability to do that. What would you say to someone watching and be like, that is easy for him to say?
Sure. Totally. Put me on the spot here. That's exactly right. But that's the thing of our faith, right? That could be said of most everything. I mean, obviously, that's kind of a very real situation that we're dealing with just in the world today, right? There's a lot of hate going around in the world. And that's, I wish it were some magic word that I could say and, all of a sudden you're more loving, right? But it's that journey, it's that encounter. If we're not willing to open up and actually see this person sitting across the table from me and talk to them and encounter and to really experience who they are as a human being, then we're not gonna encounter that love, right? It takes a lot of hard work to be able to see somebody that looks different than me or speaks different than me or, whatever it may be as me,
And I think it's done through our small acts of love and forgiveness, that we learn to do it in the great moments. So it's in the everyday stuff when someone cuts you off in traffic, or when you're at the grocery store and someone's going way too slow, or when your loved one is always leaving the wet towel on the floor and you want it hung up. It's all in the daily learnings to forgive and to look past someone's faults, that if there's a great moment where that's asked of us, we have the grace and the wherewithal and the experience of it in order to really do the heroic.
The virtuous person practices virtue.
Yes.
Wow. I enjoyed my conversation with you guys.
I enjoyed it too.
That's been great.
I enjoyed it simply because I'm young, you guys are young, and we get to target the younger audience today and let them understand that it is okay. It's
Melissa, there's
okay.
a lot at stake to faith. It's about the very meaning of our lives, and especially the meaning of our lives when we're in the midst of a crisis or when things go wrong. And we're talking about, Jesus Christ was in the business of saving lives. Yeah. And that's what we're talking about, something really, really powerful and the core of the whole meaning of life, what it's all about. And that is to be a person of love who offers himself away. And in there, we become Christ and the Spirit in the world. And that's what the world needs for peace and for justice and for mercy.
That's really powerful to end off with. I enjoyed my conversation.
I did too.
Guys, thank you so much for watching Table of Grace this week. Like Father Ronny said, beyond the sky is the limit. Open up your heart. Just talk to the Lord and be okay. Listen, that's all you need to do. Pray and listen to what He has to say. Many times we are too busy in our lives to hear what we need to hear, what is being said to us. So take this summer, take this time to pray and listen. Visit St. Martin de Porres Parish, of course. You'll enjoy your time there. Like I always end off my show with, when you wake up in the morning, thank the Lord for your family, your life, your friends, and your country. With that said, I'm Melissa Hilton, and thank you for watching Table of Grace. Bye.
At the table of grace, the cup's never empty, the plate's always full, and it's never too late to come and be filled. When love never ending, you're always welcome to the table